Recording.
Okay, we're sure about this?
Yep.
Okay, this is a redo of the Saving Seeds, Why and How by myself, Serendipity, Uprising, and my buddy Erika Action. That's Erika on the other camera there, looking like she's a viewer since we're faking it this time. So we are grateful to give this presentation from the Inner Island, unceded territory of the Comox, Pentlatch, Qualicum, and Tla'amin Nations within the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish and Kwakwaka'wakw peoples. And I apologize for any and all mispronunciations, of which I'm sure there are. Okay, so first we're going to go over some basic concepts, the why to save seeds, the how to save seeds, etc. And why save seeds? Well, here's one reason. 100 years ago, there were, on that chart over there, the top is how many seeds of each vegetable kind we had 100 years ago, how many different varieties. And then the bottom is what we have now. This is a result of big seed companies buying small seed companies, bigger seed companies buying those, multinationals buying the bigger, etc., until you end up with 4 or 5 main players in the food seed industry. And if you want to take back local control of seeds, you need to start saving them. Another reason is to retain and share skills and knowledge that is being lost globally. To maintain locally based control of our food and our food system, because seeds are our food. To maintain access to varieties and types of seeds, i.e. organic, that seed companies don't or no longer produce. To reduce dependence on outside inputs for our food production, so that food doesn't become something that can be sold to us. And cost. You can produce hundreds of squash seeds from 5 plants, thousands of squash seeds from 5 plants. If you go to the store and you're buying a special varietal or a hybrid, they're up to $1 a seed. Local adaptation and adaptability. If you keep growing plants in your own garden from seed you saved from that garden, eventually you automatically select for plants that will grow best in your garden conditions, because the ones that do the best in your garden conditions are the healthiest, they produce the most and the most healthy seed, which tend to replicate more, and that just escalates. And to build connections with the cycles and the cyclical processes of nature. By saving seeds, you're intimately tying yourself to the land and to the seasons. You really start noticing the seasons after 3 or 4 years of saving seed. So about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I got some Delicata seed at Seedy Saturday. Delicata are a cucurbita pepo, and cucurbita pepo will happily mate with any other cucurbita pepo. So when I planted my lovely little Delicata seeds, I got acorns and squumpkins and zucchini inches and all sorts of interesting and fun things. Now, the reality was that everything was edible. Some of them were more delicious than others for my taste, but then other people might have liked the ones I didn't like so much. So, but I didn't have Delicata. If I wanted to save Delicata, then I need to follow some processes that this course lays down for you. When you're saving seed, you have to pay attention to the Latin name of the plant you are planting. If you have other plants of the same species in the garden and they're insect or wind pollinated, you get crossing. So you need to know. In the case of Delicata, they're a cucurbita pepo. There are hundreds of cucurbita pepo varietals, all of which happily mate with one another and produce pretty little squumptions, which you either eat or you don't. So the last two, cucurbita is a genus, pepo is a species. So when I say pay attention to which species you're growing. It's the species. It's the pepo or the maxima or the machada. The cucurbita, cucumbers are a cucurbita. So are melons, which don't even think about crossing with squashes. So it's more important which species you're using. And some of the considerations are the plant's life cycle. You need to know if it's a biennial or an annual. Certain plants, annuals, grow, bloom, set seed, and die all this year. At least, hopefully they do that because you need that set seed. Biennials need to overwinter and then bloom and set seed next year. That becomes really important with those things which don't overwinter well in our climate. Other things to consider, is it open pollinated versus a hybrid? What does that mean? Well, hybrids are two varietals that are crossed to produce a specific hybrid, and you get, when you cross those two particular varietals, you always get that same hybrid. But that's a matter of particular pollination and stuff, and is really specialized. If you're into hybridizing, then I would suggest reading Carol Depp's Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties. And open pollinated plants are plants that regularly produce plants that look like them with no special crossing with other plants. So you have your Roma tomato and you plant your Roma tomato seeds and you get more Roma tomatoes. If you plant hybrid seeds, you will get a whole variety of things, including things that look like the parent plants, things that look like the hybrid, things that look like wild things. So that's why you need to know what you're crossing. Most people don't bother saving seed from hybrids. Now, who is saving the seed and why? What are you saving the seed for? Are you saving it for a commercial venture? If you're saving it for a commercial venture, then the rules that you should be following are a little stricter, a little more stringent. The distance that you need to keep the plants apart to maintain genetic purity is a little farther, that sort of thing. If you're just growing it for yourself, you can get a little more lax up to a point. Once you get past that point, then you end up with plants that you're unhappy with. And you need to know the number of plants available because certain varieties need a large number of plants producing seed in order for you to get healthy seedlings. Now let's go into roguing. So roguing is when you go into your seed crop, in other words, your lettuce crop or your kale crop or whatever you're deciding to save seed from, and you look at all the plants and you keep the ones that are true to type. You keep the ones that are reasonably hardy and that don't bolt too quickly. Because if it bolts too quickly, I've had arugula where I get one leaf and then I get seeds. That's pretty useless. And if it's not hardy enough to overwinter and it's an overwintering variety like kale, you really don't necessarily want those genes in your mix. You select for taste, productivity, and size. So with things like greens, you can taste them. You can say, this one tastes like it's supposed to, or it tastes really lovely and I'm keeping it. Or, geez, this tastes awful and I'm pulling it out and feeding it to the chickens. Take your pick. Lucky chickens, they like bitter. With my kale, I select out anything that's going prickly, anything that hasn't overwintered well, anything that produces a woody bulbous stem, because that just uses up plant energy for no purpose, from my point of view anyway. Let's see here. I've gone way past the page I'm on. Okay, good. Next. So isolation and exclusion are really important for insect pollinated plants and wind pollinated plants. If you don't want them crossing with any other varietals, you need to do something to keep them apart from others who want to make babies, so to speak. So ways to do this, you can either just make sure they're far enough apart. In the case of corn, that can be like 1.5 miles. You can use physical buffers. You can have stands of trees, a big clump of corn in between your cucumber 1 and your cucumber 2, etc. Something to slow down the insects and or the wind. You can use caging and netting. You can bag the flowers. That works well with squash. You can tape the flowers. If you grow a large square plot and select from the center of the plot, the theory is that the pollen that you're worried about will have worn off of the bees' pollen collectors in the outside plants, so that by the time bees get into the very inside, they have only pollen from that particular variety. That's the theory. It's worth a try anyway. And the reason that you're so concerned about the amount of plants is inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression is loss of vigor and variation due to the crossing of 2 genetically similar plants, Suzanne Ashworth and seed to seed. So with corn, for instance, you need to maintain the amount of plants that you're collecting seed from. If you reduce it a lot, then you end up with them too genetically similar, and you get inbreeding depression, which leads to an extreme loss of vigor, smallness of plants, smallness of the corn cob or whatever your food is, as the case may be, and just loss of vigor. So they just don't do well. Now, there are 2 ways to save seed. One is dry process and one is wet process. In dry process, you use for beans, peas, lettuce, herbs, roots, grains, brassicas, alliums, and many flowers. Oop, let's just wait there. Now, is there anything else we need to? Oh, yes. Okay, so how to. So you choose your seed plants, you rogue. You label them while they're growing, especially with things like lettuce. Once lettuce starts going to seed, it doesn't look like it did. So your big, beautiful red romaine all of a sudden doesn't look a whole lot different than your little cause lettuce or your drunken woman. They all look the same once they start going to seed. The leaves all turn brownish, so you can't tell whether they were red or green. Label, 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 label. We will say that a lot, partly because labels get lost a lot. So once you've selected them, let them set flower and set seed. When the seed head starts to brown, cut the stems and hang them upside down in a paper bag to collect the seeds as they drop off. Hang that in a dry, warm place. Or you can manually remove the seeds from the seed heads, depending on what you're doing. With beans and peas, once the pod itself is brown or black and dry, if it cracks open easily, just pop the beans and peas out. With lettuce and some other plants, they don't all ripen their seeds at once. And so it's best to find a way to gently knock the seed head into a clean, dry pail or bag or something once they start drying, so that you can collect on a semi-regular basis. Put them in a thin layer in a warm, dry, dark place. I use the paper bag to maintain the dark, and stick that paper bag in a warm, dry spot. And then when you think they're dry, you try to bend the seeds. Smaller seeds will often snap. With round seeds, take a hammer and try to crush it. If it crushes, then it's dry. If it turns to mush, it's not dry enough. Also with large seeds, you can try to dent them with your thumbnail, and if they don't dent easily, they're probably dry. Now, for wet process. So the wet process or the ferment process are used on tomatoes, sometimes peppers, eggplant, and sometimes the squash family. You can also use dry method for pepper and squash. Just cut the pepper or the squash open, pull out the seeds and dry them. Supposedly they do germinate a little better if you ferment them. It kills off some of the fungal bacterial problems that seedlings can have. So to ferment them, what you do is you scoop the seeds and some of the pulp into a container and let it ferment for about 3 days. With squash, I find you have to add a little water to achieve that, the fermentation. Um, After 3 days, add some more water. The seeds should sink and the pulp should float. So pour off the pulp, drain the seeds, rinse them well, lay them out dry on a flat, non-porous surface. Fine mesh screen, cake pan, plate, or tray will all work well. Stir them gently with your fingers as they dry so they won't stick together. And when fully dry, store them in well-labeled, airtight containers. Okay, now let's talk about seed storage. This chart is about the average life for, I would say, top quality healthy seeds. At the end of 3 years with dry beans, you should still have top quality healthy seeds. With parsnips, 2 years is probably as long as you want to keep them, actually. With onions and leeks, it's not a lot longer than 2 to 3 years. But most things you can get away with at least 4 or 5 years if you keep them in a cool, dry, well-labeled container. Now, labeled, that's up to you. One thing I would include is date. Date's important, especially as the years go by. And you realize that that lovely bag of squash seed you have is actually 12 years old and maybe should become pig food. Otherwise, label it so you know exactly what it is, preferably so that it contains the variety under which it was sold. Many people go, well, let's see, I got this seed the year that Doug was born, so we'll call it Doug's tomato. Well, that only works for you. I need to know what I'm getting from you other than Doug's tomato. And once you've got your seed saved and you're wanting to use it or to share it, testing the germination is a really great idea. The pictures give you a good example. To save seed or to test seed for myself, I roll up seed in a damp hanky, stick it inside a plastic bag that has an open end to it, and make sure that the hanky stays moist. Do not let it dry out at all. And just keep checking on it daily until you see regular sprouting, and give it another day or two just to see if there's more, and then count how many seeds you have. It's nice to start with a nice even number like 20 or 10 or 50 or 100, so that then you can say, okay, I've got 90% germination, I've got 20% germination, which is pretty shameful, but some things don't have super good germination. Some of the Apiaceae, the umbellifers, don't really germinate well at all. I've read stuff that says with parsnips, you're lucky if you get more than 25% germination. So don't let that make you too sad. Now, we're going to start by families with the easy ones, the inbreeders. So the inbreeders are the ones that, for the most part, one of the mechanics of the way the flower is built is before or as it opens, it pollinates itself, and that pollination causes the ovary to shut down to any more pollen, so it won't cross with anything else. So the inbreeders are Asteraceae, the lettuces, endive, chicory, salsify, Solanaceae, tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and Fabaceae, which are beans, peas, and lentils. We'll go into more detail about that because they're not quite all inbreeders. I wish it was that easy. So the lettuce family. the Asteraceae. It's a large family. We get a lot of edibles out of it: lettuce, endive, chicory, salsify, sunflower, and way more. Lettuce and endive are really easy because they are complete self-pollinators, and the longevity of the seed is actually pretty good. They recommend that you have a minimum of 5 or 6 plants if you want to save for community, and 20 or 40 if you want to save commercially. I know many people who use one lettuce plant to save seed from one type. They may save 6 or 7 different types of lettuce seeds, but they're not saving 6 plants of each of those types. And they still get reasonable lettuce. You can slowly but surely deselect yourself into a place where your plants are all small and etc. But it would take a while. And isolation distance, they recommend 3 meters for community and 8 meters for commercial. Salsify, I would say they consider advanced. It is insect pollinated, yes, but there are only, that I know of, 2 or 3 varieties out there of salsify. They all look the same. And my guess is they all taste the same. It's a biennial. It's super tough. You just leave it in the ground and it overwinters. You don't need to do anything special at all. So I actually find it extremely easy to save seed from. Minimum plants, 20 for community and 80 for commercial, which is a lot. But 20 salsify plants really doesn't take up all that much room. So you can do it. Now, tomato family. So the difficulty of seed saving in tomatoes is easy because they're self-pollinated for the most part. And that's true of everything that says it's self-pollinated. The way we get new varietals and things that are severely self-pollinated is somebody or something manages to sneak a bit of pollen in that actually gets through and creates a new varietal. So every once in a while, you're going to get a few off types. Now, the longevity of tomato seed is great, and you only need 6 plants to save for community seeds, 20 for commercial. And the spacing is not that bad, 5 meters. Now, what's underneath our faces here? Oh, that's eggplants. Now, something else to remember is potatoes are a part of the tomato family. If you want to grow potatoes, not from potatoes, if you grow from potatoes, you're growing a clone. It's identical to the mother plant, no different whatsoever. If you just cut the potato up and plant it with an eye, and it'll grow and give you another potato just like mom. If you want something new, then potatoes actually bloom. And if you look close, those blooms on a regular basis produce little green balls. Those are potato fruit. Treat them exactly like tomatoes. So once the potato starts to brown, like once the plant starts to brown in the fall, pick off the fruit, dig out the seed and ferment them just the same and grow them out. You'll get a whole variety of stuff. Some of it probably not wonderfully edible or growable, but some of it'll be amazing. Beans. Beans are quite easy. They cross-pollinate more than I had thought they did. So I would definitely plant something in between different varietals, something tall. Bean seed lasts a long, long time, 3 to 5 years for top quality seed, but we've all heard of instances where seed has been saved hundreds and thousands of years and then regrown. So with runner beans and broad beans, they are definitely somewhat, at least, insect pollinated. So you really need to concern yourself with cross-pollination if you're growing more than one kind, or if you think a neighbor within the isolation distance is growing more than a different kind than you are. Peas are another easy one. I haven't had a lot of cross-pollinating with peas, actually. And ideally, you will save from at least 20 seeds with peas. Now, let's go into outbreeders. These are the ones that are either wind or insect pollinated. So the cabbages, the carrots, corn, cucurbits, so squash, cucumbers, etc., beets, aurochs, Swiss chard, all of the alliums, garlic, onions. So pollinators are important. You need them to be around when you're having your plants do their thing. And you need to consider inbreeding depression and loss of vigor from inbreeding outbreeders. Few too many bees there. Okay, so in the cabbage family, we have a whole mess of plants that love to interspecies breed. Cabbage itself is Brassica oleracea, and it's also kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, most kales, broccoli, and cauliflower. All of those things will happily and easily cross with one another. If you look at the chart on the left-hand side of the screen, the one with all the Latin stuff on it, you can see how many of the Brassica species we eat from. And most of these will, to some extent, cross with everybody else in the family. I regularly get a green mustard kale cross. I'm certain that's what it is. It's bluer than a regular green mustard. It has the same shape. It has the same flavor. The seed heads are always sterile, which hybrids often do. It's a lovely plant, but I'm pretty sure it's a cross of two things that shouldn't be crossing in my garden. So this is a family where you need to deal with isolation, which is why most of them are advanced. Cabbage, Chinese cabbage, advanced. Insect pollinated, you need a minimum of 6 community plants, and I think they're being kind there because for commercial, you need 80. They're insect pollinated. You probably need to isolate them by having none of the cabbage family blooming at the same time and hoping that none of your neighbors within the isolation distance have any blooming at the same time. For commercial seeds, that's 1.5 kilometers. Community seeds, they say 200 meters. I think that's probably a little kind. And something to remember with these distances in the insect pollination is if you're growing a happy, healthy polyculture with lots and lots of things blooming all the time, you're going to attract more insects than the average person. And so your isolation distances may actually have to be farther. Now, the carrot family is also difficult because they're also insect pollinated. Parsnips, they say intermediate. I find that the variation in varietals is minimal unless you're growing one of the new varieties and you want to keep it exactly as it is. Parsnips are parsnips. They're winter hardy. There's no special work to get them to go to seed except you don't pull them up and eat them. You need 20 of them minimum for community plants and 80 for commercial, and a large isolation distance. Corn. So corn is wind pollinated. And for that reason, the recommended isolation distance is 800 feet to half a mile. I've read from a mile to 2.5 miles. The easiest way to deal with corn is to bag the flowers. You bag the male tassels, which are up top, separate from the female tassels, which are on the corn cob. It's time consuming, but it's really easy. The bags just have to be secure enough to keep the wind out. They don't have to be secure enough to keep insects out because they're not insect pollinated. And don't breed a plant with its own pollen. Always use pollen from another plant. And now for the Cucurbitaceae. We'll start with the squash. There are 4 species of squash. There's Pepo, Maxima, Moschata, and Mixta, also now known as Agriosperma, I believe. Pepo is pretty much all of the summer squash. It's zucchinis, it's spaghetti squash, it's marrows, acorn squash, delicata. Many of the smaller pumpkins are all pepos, and they will all happily interbreed.
What's cucumber?
Hmm?
What's cucumber?
Cucumber is a different Cucurbitaceae. I can't remember which one it is at the moment. So when you're saving seed from squash, it's either a really, really, really great idea to know which species each one is from, or simply to tape and then only cross that variety with that variety. To tape, you wait at about 5 o'clock in the evening, you go out and you look at all your baby almost squashes. When you look at them, you will see that some of them are little girl squashes and some of them are little boy squash flowers. The female have a mini squash at the base. That's how you tell the difference. Now, when you go out at 5 o'clock, what you're looking for are these little baby squash with a bloom on them. It isn't quite open yet, and it looks like it's trying to kiss. The lips of the flower are just starting to think about open. Tape that one shut. Find a female and a male, at least of each kind, preferably from different plants if you can. And then at 9 o'clock in the morning, you come back and you untape these. You mate the male flower to the female flower. And then you tape the female flower back up and let her do her thing. Eventually, you will get a squash out of it.
Do you want to say about Danny's bag process instead of tape?
Oh, yes. And a friend of ours, Danny Crenna, uses little mesh bags that she's made to pull down over top and pull tight. They're tight enough the insects can't get in them, and they're quite reusable. So it means that you're not damaging the flower while you're doing this, which can be a concern in the taping process. And here we are. So difficulties, intermediate for everybody. They're all insect pollinated, so you got a taper bag or some such thing, or only grow one varietal, and know that your neighbors within the isolation distance are also growing that varietal. Yeah, that's about that. Now, for the beet family, Amarantaceae includes chard, spinach, quinoa, and beets. So chard or Swiss chard and beets are the exact same family, the exact same species. And Swiss chard is also known as perpetual spinach, among other names. And they'll all happily cross with one another, and they're all biennial. So you have to get them to overwinter so that you can get seed next year, which is why they're advanced or intermediate to save. Swiss chard is intermediate because it actually overwinters just a little better than beets do usually. And they're all wind pollinated. Spinach is related but will not cross with them. And as you can see, you need quite an isolation distance. Since they are wind pollinated, caging would work really well because you don't have to worry about introducing insects into the cage. Now for the alliums. So in the upper left corner, the pink seed ball or flower ball, that is leeks going to seed, and that's leeks down below there. In the middle, you're looking at garlic. Garlic is usually multiplied by one of two ways. You either take apart the head that you purchase in the store, you just pull apart the cloves and stick each individual clove in the ground, and it'll grow a whole new head for you, which is a clone of the parent plant. Or they produce bulbils up top. Those little round balls are called bulbils, and you can plant those. The first year, you usually get a nice big fat round clove, just a single one. And then if you let that go, the next year you get your big head of cloves. You can also grow onions from sets. Now, sets are little baby onion plants that they planted late last summer to get just big enough to survive the winter before they went dormant. The bigger they are, the more likely they are to try to go to seed immediately on you rather than producing the bulb of onion, which is what you want. And they're all insect pollinated. The difficulty is intermediate, partly because it's not done all that often. So you don't necessarily need to worry about your neighbor's onions or leeks cross-pollinating with yours, as long as you're only growing one variety. With onions, the big issue is getting them over winter. Usually what people will do is harvest them in the fall, put them in a cool, dry spot, and the nice ones that overwinter well, they replant and then let them bloom. With leeks, if you're growing an overwintering variety, then you just let them overwinter, they bloom the next spring. If you're growing a fall variety that doesn't overwinter well, then harvest them as late as possible, and you can save the root section. Eat the leek, but leave about an inch of leek on the root. Plant that in a pot somewhere. It'll start slowly growing. By spring, you throw it in the ground, and it'll send you some seed. I mean, it won't be a super big, healthy plant, but it'll give you viable seed. Wow, we're done already. That was fast.
There you go.
So our sources that we used are Carol Depp's Breed Your Own Vegetable Varieties and her Resilient Gardener. And then Suzanne Ashworth's Seed to Seed. This is a really good resource on basic vegetable seed saving. Carol Depp is a little more complicated and a little more fun and interesting if you're into that. If you're into the basics, this is probably better for you. And maybe even better if you're into the basics is the Seeds of Diversity, USC Canada, How to Save Your Own Seeds. And I think that's the 7th edition. I can't quite see there. 6th edition. And there might be a new edition out now. Who knows? In which case, use the new one.
So one thing I was going to say was a couple of the... Hi, I'm on both screens now. I'll put it back to Saren.
Okay.
So because you can hear me, but you can see me. One of the questions that was raised, or a point that I think maybe you want to expand on, is how in community seed saving, you may not need to save as many seed.
Yes.
And then also the time stacking, saving seed 1 year from a certain number of plants, and then the next year from it.
Thank you. I'd forgotten those. So one of the ways to deal with needing so many plants, when you're saving with community, if you save from 3 Roma tomatoes and you actually need 12, If 3 other friends have also saved from Roma tomatoes, then within that year, you've saved from 12 different Romas, and you're totally fine. If you don't have that luck, then you can grow 3 this year from the same package, grow 3 next year, 3 the year after, and 3 the year after. Then you've got your 12. And then you just start that all over again. You just grow 3 seeds each year, because out of those 3 plants, you're not getting 3 seeds. You're getting 3,000 or 30,000 seeds. You only need to take 12 seeds out of the mixture of all 12 of your plants. So you've got lots of choice, and it's pretty easy to maintain your diversity.
Cool, thanks. And then another point that I wanted to raise based on a question that was asked in the original presentation was about sharing seeds. And if you're not sure about your proficiency in saving seed, is it good to share your seeds with your community or with the seed library? One suggestion I had was that you could just note on the package of seeds that you're sharing, I'm a beginner at seed saving, and then at least the person who's receiving those seeds will know to sort of that they may not all be perfect, or
yes, that they may have crossed. And actually that's a really great point, is just label your seeds as best you can, especially when you're sharing. Label the year they're collected for sure, maybe your name, so that people can come up to you and say, when I grew that delicata last year, I got this funny little acorn stripy thing. It was delicious, but it wasn't a delicata. Just so that you can maybe get better at your seed saving practices, or you just decide that's where you like them.
And I thought I would just put a quick plug in for the Denman seed library, in case anyone is watching this and they're not aware of it.
Yes.
So Saren, do you want to talk about it?
So in the computer access site, the portable building that's in between the brand new daycare center and the community school, if you look back in behind them, sort of, kind of, there's a little portable. And inside there, in one little area, is a seed bank that community members have been really kind to put together. You bring in packages of seed, normal vegetable garden size packets worth of seed, and take out what you want. Label them well, preferably have them in small packages, preferably. And that's open Thursdays from 3 to 7, and usually Wednesdays from 4 to 7, at the moment anyway.
And just one more thing to say about that is, I think the idea of starting it was to encourage people to, it's sort of a seed bank, but it's also a seed library. And the idea behind that is that you would take a variety and try to grow it out and save the seed from that variety, and then return some of the seeds of that same variety the following year, or in subsequent years. But
fresher and revamped, because if we just used it as a seed bank, over the years those seeds become less and less and less viable. If you come in and you grab some broad bean seeds, and then you bring back broad bean seeds next year, and somebody does this every year, those seeds are always fresh and totally viable.
And then maybe, so Denman has a really strong seed saving community between the seed savers in the Transition Denman group and the Garden Club. There are a lot of knowledgeable seed savers on the island here.
Oh yeah.
And really active seed sharers as well. So it's not very hard to find information about that. And Saren, I guess you wanted to share your email with people if they.
Yes. I forgot to mention, we should have put it down on this one here.
Mm-hmm.
So my email is PAN_, not dash, but the one down at the bottom, KISST @yahoo.com.
So you can get in touch with Saren if you have questions about the presentation or about seed saving, and we can try to get you some answers. And thank you so much, Saren, for your sharing your knowledge. And we hope everyone can learn a little bit and keep learning and keep building our capacity in the community to save seeds.
Yes, please, and share this video. I want other people to have this knowledge.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
That, we'll sign off. Thanks.
Hasta los huevos.
And here I am again in double.
There's two of you, and at different angles yet.
I don't know how to. There we go. Bye, everyone.